Summary. With proper bribery, one can buy themselves out of any situation. But some creatures cannot be bartered with. Chapter 9, Scavenger. Tolpoenpa, the slugcats kept moving through the rooms. It only took traveling through a few pipes for them to find the room with the toll. Survivor looked down the small staircase, seeing at least 5 scavengers in the middle of the room. Some were chittering among one another, seeming deep in conversation. Others were loitering around or digging around in the ground. Among them was a large ornate mask on a tall stick. It was off-white with red antlers and many different pearls hanging off it by strings. Survivor made a quick scan of the room, feeling relieved when he noticed the scavenger that Hunter had killed was absent from the group ahead. Hunter seemed to have come to the same conclusion, as he sighed and slightly slumped forward in relief. Of course, the scavenger could have still briefed their fellow friends on what had happened, so the slugcats would just have to hope that hadn't happened or that the scavengers would be forgiving when they were offered a pearl. Survivor glanced over at Hunter and squeezed his paw reassuringly. Hunter sighed, squeezing back. Survivor watched as he quickly checked his back to make sure he had remembered to drop any spears. Finding his back empty and disarmed, Hunter turned to Survivor and nodded, a determined look in his eye but still looking very nervous. Survivor leaned in and gave him a comforting nuzzle and a purr. Hunter responded in kind. Finally, they approached the scavengers warily, taking slow and careful steps down the stairs. Once they reached the bottom of the stairs, the scavengers took note of their presence, turning towards the new visitors. One of them pointed their spear at Hunter and chittered something to the others, something akin to a warning. Hunter stilled, eyes going wide. Survivor quickly reached over and squeezed his paw reassuringly once again. He seemed to relax slightly, raising his empty hand to show the scavenger he was unarmed. The scavengers looked over the red slugcat for a moment, making sure he didn't have any hidden weapons. Once they were done with him, they looked over Survivor the same way. When the scavengers noticed the pearl in Survivor's paw, their eyes went almost comically wide as they chittered excitedly among each other. One scavenger, with light gray skin and red eyes with big pupils, pointed to the pearl before pawing at the ground and reaching their hand out. In response, Survivor carefully extended their paw towards the scavenger, offering them the pearl. The other scavengers exchanged looks, some nervous, others excited, as the one with light gray skin approached slowly and carefully. When they were within arm's length, they chittered and reached their hand out towards the pearl. The slugcats exchanged a small glance before Survivor mewed back, putting the pearl in their open palm. The scavengers studied the white pearl closely for a moment, its shine reflecting in their eyes. After a moment, they nodded to themselves in satisfaction before reaching for the spears on their back. Survivor startled and took a step back. Hunter scowled and stepped forward, pushing Survivor behind himself and glaring at the scavenger. In response, the scavenger stilled for a moment before chittering something that sounded like an apology and retrieving the spear from their back way slower than before. After taking it off their back, they held it out towards Hunter, who carefully took it. Survivor looked over Hunter's shoulder, seeing the tip of the spear draped in a long red cloth, part of it covered in some sort of red powder. An explosive spear. A very rare and valuable scavenger gift, even for the payment of a pearl. Hunter studied the spear with fascination, seeming to come to the same conclusion as Survivor. "Thank you," he said, nodding towards the scavenger. They nodded back, chittering happily, and walked back to their friends, who stepped forward to study the pearl. Another, more elderly scavenger, stepped forward and looked towards the slugcats, as if studying them. After a moment, they grunted and moved their arm in a sort of move-on through motion. Survivor and Hunter both sighed in relief before taking each other's paws and walking forward. Moving past the scavengers, they nodded their heads and mewed to each one in thanks. The scavengers nodded back in kind. Once they reached the other side of the toll, they climbed up the poles leading to the upper side of the room. Once there, they spotted a pipe and slid through. When they got out, Survivor took a deep breath of the fairly fresh air, uncaring of the smell of garbage in the air. "We made it. Thank the stars." He turned to Hunter, who was smiling wide. "I never thought I'd be this happy to see these murky waters and to smell the garbage in the air once again." He said this, chuckling slightly. Survivor hummed in agreement, pulling Hunter into a side hug as they purred happily. After a moment, they detached from one another, preparing to move on. Glancing around, Survivor noted an unpopped popcorn plant behind the pipe they had gone through. Humming, Hunter picked a spear off the ground and aimed for the plant. "Let's see if I can remember how you did this previously," he said, smirking slightly, before pulling his arm back and throwing the spear into the base of the popcorn plant. The popcorn plant peeled open and popped its kernels, ready to be enjoyed. "Well done," Survivor said proudly, clapping at the display. Hunter struck an over-exaggerated pose in response, confidently puffing out his chest and closing his eyes. "I had a very good teacher." He said it jokingly, smiling smugly at Survivor and winking. Survivor blushed slightly, turning away and opting to start eating the kernels, doing his best to ignore the teasing laugh behind him. While he ate, Hunter kept guard, keeping an eye on their surroundings to make sure nothing would sneak up on them. Popping his third kernel into his mouth, Survivor glanced at the skies, seeing dark clouds gathering together. They didn't have long before the rain would start. He wasn't worried though. If he remembered correctly, there were only a couple more pipes before they reached a shelter. Feeling full, Survivor walked up to Hunter and gently took the spear off of him. Hunter turned to look at Survivor confusedly for a moment before perking up when the white slugcat pointed towards the plant. Hunter walked over to the plant, plucking a kernel and chowing down. Survivor glanced over, chuckling quietly as he saw Hunter close his eyes, enjoying the taste of his food. He really should learn to enjoy things more. Survivor thought, thinking back to how ravenously Hunter would always consume the meat of things he hunted, ripping into his meal with the same fervor as someone who'd never eaten in his life. Survivor fidgeted with the spear in his paws slightly, scanning the surroundings and keeping an eye out for predators. The thought of a vulture ambushing them from out of nowhere made him shudder. Any other predator could be avoided or fought fairly easily, but vultures could fly and were tough predators. Hunter suddenly interrupted his thoughts, climbing up and pulling him into a hug from behind. He purred as Hunter embraced him, giving him a lick on the neck. "How close are we to the gate?" he hummed, nuzzling his head into the crook of the white slugcat's neck. Survivor tilted his head, resting it on Hunter's. "Just a couple more rooms." With a final squeeze, Hunter let Survivor go. Survivor handed the spear to Hunter. He took it, swapped it for his other paw, and gently grabbed it with Survivor's. Together, they started moving towards the pipe on the other side. There was some water on the way towards the pipe, but no spear-stealing worms, to Hunter's relief. There were some poles and platforms they would have to jump over to get to the pipe, which was placed rather high up. There were 3 small pits of murky water above the platforms. Looking down, Hunter spotted a few leeches swimming around in the pits. Though they were few and the water level would make climbing out of the pit easy. Falling into the water wouldn't be too dangerous. Survivor seemed to have come to the same conclusion as he sighed in relief, seeming a bit nervous about the height of the platforms. The gaps between the platforms were fairly wide. A long leap from all fours would be required to cross the distance. Luckily, the slugcats were both fairly agile and could make the jumps without problem. After just a bit of time, they climbed up the pole leading to the pipe. Hunter squeezed Survivor's hand and smiled. He smiled and squeezed back before letting go and leaning down to crawl into the pipe. He turned to Hunter, who was watching the skies again to make sure no vulture could ambush them when they were so close. Hunter glanced back, noticing Survivor staring. "Go on through, I'll be right behind you." Survivor nodded and turned back around, ready to climb into the next room, when a movement inside the pipe caught his eye. "What?" Before he had time to react, a dropwig leaped out of the pipe, hissing. He yelped and tried to scramble backwards, but the drop was too fast. It lunged forward, and Survivor could hear Hunter scream as the hostile creature used its huge, sharp mandibles to bite down at his midsection. Survivor could faintly hear, and very much feel, his flesh tearing over his own agonized screams. Hot red waves of agony pulsed through his torso as his vision blurred. Desperate to get free, he grabbed hold of the huge mandibles biting down on him, trying to wrench them open. Suddenly, he felt the pressure on his torso disappear as the dropwig released him. He fell backwards and landed hard on the ground. His ears rang, and his head spun, his vision blurring further. He was losing consciousness fast. He closed his eyes and reached a paw towards his torso. He pushed down and whimpered in agony. He could feel something wet and warm under his paw, which confirmed his injury was more than just a flesh wound. Survivor whined, opening his eyes as another fresh wave of pain pulsed from his wound. Slowly but surely, Survivor could feel his consciousness slip away, no matter how hard he tried to stay awake. Before his eyes slipped shut completely, he noticed a silhouette in front of him and faintly felt someone try to shake him awake. Hunter was on the dropwig in seconds, tackling it to the ground and forcing it to let go of Survivor, the poor slugcat crumpling to the ground in pain. He pinned the dropwig down with his free paw and growled. It hissed and tried to escape. Hunter responded by raising his spear up high before driving it all the way through the insect's exoskeleton and soft organs before finally driving the spear into the ground, pinning the creature. It shrieked in pain and convulsed. Hunter grabbed onto its mandibles, and with an enraged scream, he twisted and pulled back. There was a satisfying crunch as the mandibles were pulled free from the dropwig's corpse. With another rage-filled scream, he threw the mandibles at the corpse, the pair of appendages bouncing off the dropwig and landing on the ground next to it. Hunter breathed heavily and had half a mind to jump on the corpse again, to use his teeth and claws to tear the fucker to shreds, for even daring to hurt Survivor, daring to touch his mate. When he heard an agonizing whine sound from behind him, he completely abandoned that plan, instead quickly turning around and falling to his knees at Survivor's side. The first thing he took note of was how deep the wound on Survivor's torso was, though it wasn't deep enough for him to see any organs. Thank the stars. The wound was an ugly laceration, his flesh was torn to shreds in a long line, stretching horizontally across his lower midsection and gushing blood like a faucet. Survivor suddenly moved, reaching a shaky paw to the wound, pushing down slightly, and whimpering as blood pooled up around his grip. Hunter was completely at a loss of what to do, his paws hovering over Survivor's twitching body, unable to think rationally as his mind raced to try to find a solution. The white slugcat made another noise, something akin to a sob, as his eyes widened and his body convulsed in agony. Hunter gasped, slipping a paw under Survivor's upper back and carefully trying to sit him up slightly. Survivor's eyes looked foggy, and he seemed to be having a hard time staying conscious. Now it was Hunter's turn to whimper as he shook Survivor, trying to keep him awake. If he falls asleep, he might not wake up again. Survivor's eyes started to close, and Hunter panicked. With a high-pitched, stress-filled wail, he pushed his paw into Survivor's wound, trying desperately to slow the bleeding. The pale, white slugcat's eyes widened once again, and a strangled scream left his throat. "I'm sorry, Survivor. I'm sorry," Hunter cried, cradling Survivor close as his mate continually yelped, hissed, or screamed in pain. "Calm down, take a deep breath, and don't panic." Hunter took a deep breath, trying to calm himself down. Survivor had stopped screaming, instead whimpering in pain, his shaky paws weakly wrapping around Hunter in an embrace. Properly calmed down and concentrated, Hunter refocused his efforts on caring for the open wound. Lifting his paw slightly, he noted the pressure he had applied had managed to slow the bleeding slightly, but not nearly enough. The wound has to be wrapped in something to aid in the clotting process. The red slugcat looked around, trying to find anything to use as a bandage, but there was nothing. Just a small piece of cloth would do. Hunter's eyes widened in recollection as he clumsily reached over his shoulder and pulled the explosive spear off his back. "Stay with me, Survivor. Please," he whispered desperately, hoping Survivor was still awake, still alive, and still able to hear his words. Survivor whimpered weakly in response, obviously fighting as hard as he could to stay conscious. Hunter used his claws to rip through the red cloth, being careful not to use the parts at the tip covered in explosive powder. "You're doing so well, just a little bit longer. I'll patch you up, it'll be okay, I promise." Hunter was rambling, tears cascading down his cheeks like a pair of waterfalls as he clumsily started trying to wrap the red cloth around Survivor's torso with shaky paws. Survivor purred, trying to comfort his mate despite his own predicament. He let out another heartbreaking scream as Hunter tightened the bandage, securing it in place with a knot. I know it hurts. I know. He purred, trying to comfort his mate. Once the bandage was applied, Hunter embraced Survivor, holding him tight but with controlled gentleness so as not to jostle the wound. Survivor hugged back as best he could, his grip weak from blood loss. His mate sobbed into his shoulder as Hunter rubbed comforting circles into his back. Hunter felt the ground shake and moved his paws to hold Survivor's legs and support his back. I have to pick you up, okay? The slug cat in his arms nodded, bracing himself and wrapping his own arms around Hunter's neck. Hold on tight. With another pained yell from Survivor, Hunter quickly got to his feet and crawled through the pipe. Please let there be a shelter close by.